Julian Vance, a reclusive tech millionaire, returned to the modest suburban street of his youth only to be paralyzed by the sight of his young nephew, Leo, cornered in a meticulously manicured backyard, begging for his hair not to be cut. The boy's new guardian, a man the neighborhood praised for his saintly devotion after Julian's sister passed, held a pair of gleaming garden shears with a chillingly placid smile. Why would a child plead for his hair as if for his life? And who was the real monster hiding behind a mask of communal grief? For a full year, Julian had avoided this place. After his sister Alara's sudden, tragic fall down the stairs, this street, this house, had become a monument to his failure. He had been 1,000 miles away, closing a deal, when he should have been here. He'd sent money, of course. He always sent money. It was his pathetic, insufficient language for love. He'd allowed Alara's new partner, Marcus, to handle everything: the funeral, the estate, and worst of all, the guardianship of her 7-year-old son, Leo. Everyone said Marcus was a rock, a pillar of strength. Julian had clung to that narrative because the alternative was too heavy to consider. But a promise was a promise, and he had sworn to Alara on their last call that he would always look out for her boy. Guilt was a powerful gravitational force, and it had finally pulled his polished Italian sports car back to this cul-de-sac of ghosts. The house looked wrong. Alara's home had always been a place of chaotic, vibrant life. Her garden overflowed with wildflowers and unruly herbs. Paint splatters from art projects decorated the porch steps. Now the lawn was a perfect, sterile green carpet. The rose bushes were pruned with brutalist precision. There was no life, only order. A cold dread, sharp and familiar, snaked its way up Julian's spine. It was the same feeling he'd had on patrol routes in dusty, forgotten countries. The silence that screamed louder than any explosion. He parked down the street, his expensive suit feeling like a costume, and walked toward the property, his gaze drawn to the high wooden fence that enclosed the backyard. He didn't go to the front door. Some instinct, some deep primal alarm bell told him to look first, to observe. He found a small gap in the fence slats, a knot in the wood that had fallen away, and peered through. And that's when he heard it. The small, desperate voice that shattered the suburban peace and ripped a hole in his world. "No, please. Please don't cut my hair." Mommy liked it. The voice was thin, trembling, and utterly terrified. It was Leo. Julian's blood ran cold. He saw his nephew, small and fragile, backed against a pristine white shed. Leo's beautiful, long curls, the same wild, chestnut curls Alara had, the ones she'd been so proud of, were fisted in the hand of Marcus. Marcus, the grieving partner, the community hero. He stood over the boy, not with the exasperated air of a parent giving a necessary trim, but with the cold, deliberate posture of a tormentor. The shears in his other hand glinted in the afternoon sun, huge and grotesque. They weren't barber's scissors. They were for hacking through thick branches. "Your mommy's gone," Marcus said, his voice a low, venomous purr that didn't carry beyond the fence. "And this hair makes you look like a weak little girl. We're going to make a man out of you." He raised the shears. Leo let out a choked sob, squeezing his eyes shut, his small body rigid with fear. The world narrowed for Julian. The manicured lawn, the cloudless sky, the hum of a distant lawnmower. It all vanished. There was only the monster and the child. The past and the present collided within him. A memory of another small, helpless person he couldn't save, another promise he'd broken. The carefully constructed walls around his heart, built with wealth and distance and a decade of disciplined silence, crumbled into dust. He didn't think. He acted, with a guttural roar that was part fury and part agony. He kicked the gate. The lock splintered, the wood groaned, and the gate flew open, slamming against the fence. He was across the lawn in 3 long strides, his 6'3" frame a thundercloud of righteous rage. "Get your hands off him," Julian shouted, his voice a low growl that vibrated with menace. Marcus froze, his head snapping up. The placid smile on his face vanished, replaced by a flicker of pure shock, then annoyance. He immediately released Leo's hair and dropped the shears as if they were hot coals. The boy scrambled away, hiding behind the shed, his small face streaked with tears. Marcus's transformation was instantaneous and sickeningly smooth. The cruelty vanished, replaced by a mask of weary concern. He straightened his polo shirt and ran a hand through his perfectly coiffed hair. "Julian, my God, you scared me," he said, his voice dripping with false bonhomie. He gestured toward the discarded shears. "Just a bit of afternoon gardening. Leo's hair has gotten so unmanageable. I was just going to give it a little snip. We were playing a game." Julian looked from Marcus's convincing, open face to the terror still etched on Leo's. He saw the way the boy trembled, the way his eyes were wide and fixed on Marcus, waiting for the other shoe to drop. A game. The lie was so blatant, so insulting, it took Julian's breath away. He walked past Marcus without a word and knelt by the shed. "Leo," he said softly, keeping his voice even gentle. "It's Uncle Julian. Are you okay?" The boy didn't speak. He just stared, his chest heaving with silent sobs. He wouldn't come closer. He was trapped between two large men, one a known monster, the other a stranger. Julian's heart clenched. He had let it get this far. He had stayed away, trusting the whispers of neighbors and the carefully crafted emails from Marcus. He stood up, turning his back on Leo to shield him, and faced the man who had corrupted his sister's home. "I'm taking him for some ice cream," Julian stated. It was not a request. Marcus's smile tightened. "I don't know, Julian. He's had a difficult day. A change in routine might upset him." "He looks pretty upset already," Julian countered, his voice flat and cold. "We'll be back in an hour." He didn't wait for permission. He gently coaxed Leo from behind the shed, his hand hovering over the boy's shoulder but not touching him, guiding him toward the broken gate. As they left the yard, Julian glanced back. Marcus was watching them, the mask of concern slipping just enough for Julian to see the cold fury in his eyes. In the quiet, air-conditioned sanctuary of his car, Julian looked in the rearview mirror at the small, silent boy buckled into the back seat. Leo was staring out the window, his tiny hands clenched in his lap. In that moment, watching the reflection of the child he had failed, Julian Vance made a quiet, unbreakable vow. "I will find out what you are hiding, Marcus, and I will burn your world to the ground to protect this boy. This time I will not be too late." The investigation began with silence. Julian took Leo to a quiet park by a lake instead of an ice cream shop. He bought 2 cones and they sat on a bench watching the ducks. Leo wouldn't touch his. He just held it as it melted down his hand, his eyes vacant. Julian didn't push him to talk. He knew trauma. He knew it had its own language, and it was rarely spoken in words. He just sat with the boy, a silent, solid presence. He wanted Leo to feel, for the first time in what was likely a long time, that he didn't have to do anything. He didn't have to perform or pretend or be brave. He just had to be. After an hour of watching the sun dip toward the horizon, Julian drove back to the house on the cul-de-sac. The forced cheerfulness in Marcus's greeting was grating. Julian left his personal number, written on the back of a business card worth more than the car Marcus drove. "Call me if he needs anything." "Anything at all," Julian said, his eyes locking with Marcus's, a clear and unspoken challenge passing between them. That night, Julian didn't go back to his sterile penthouse apartment. He checked into a nondescript hotel and turned the room into a command center. His past in military intelligence had taught him how to dismantle an enemy, piece by piece. You started with the perimeter. He spent hours online, a ghost in the machine pulling public records. He mapped out Marcus's entire life: financials, employment history, past relationships. On the surface, it was clean. A little too clean. A man with a mid-level sales job who suddenly seemed to be living far beyond his means after his partner's death. He was paying off debts, leasing a new car. It was all explained away by a life insurance policy Alara had, one that Marcus, as her domestic partner, had collected. But Julian knew Alara. She was meticulous. She would have put everything in a trust for Leo. His next step was to find the reluctant witness. He remembered Mrs. Gable from his childhood, the elderly woman next door who saw everything from her porch swing. The next morning, he approached her house with a bouquet of flowers from her favorite nursery, a detail he'd remembered for over 20 years. She was wary at first, her eyes darting toward Marcus's house. "Marcus is such a good man," she recited, the words sounding hollow and rehearsed. "He's been so devoted to that poor boy." Julian didn't argue. He just listened, his gaze steady and patient. "Ilara loved those curls," he said quietly, not looking at her, but at the house next door. "She used to say they were her little lion's mane." Mrs. Gable's facade cracked. A tear traced a path through the wrinkles on her cheek. "He yells," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "when he thinks no one can hear. Terrible things. I hear things breaking. And the boy, he doesn't play outside anymore. Not unless Marcus is watching him like a hawk." She told him that Marcus had subtly threatened her when she'd once asked if everything was all right, mentioning how easily an old woman living alone could have a fall. The threat was clear. She was terrified. Julian thanked her, his resolve hardening into something cold and sharp. Her fear was the confirmation he needed. He was not just imagining things, he was walking into a war. He tried to talk to Leo again, arranging another outing with a reluctant Marcus. This time he brought a sketchpad and colored pencils. They sat in the park again, and while Julian sketched the lake, Leo began to draw. The first drawings were just scribbles, angry black and red lines. But then a picture took shape. It was a small stick figure with a huge, wild mane of curly hair, holding hands with a larger figure, a smiling woman. They were inside a house filled with color. The next drawing was starkly different. The small figure was the same, but the hair was gone, scribbled over with black. The figure was inside a small, dark box, and outside the box stood a much larger, shadowy figure with no face. Julian's blood turned to ice. It was a confession, a testimony drawn in crayon. The hair wasn't just hair. It was a symbol of his mother's love, his last connection to her. And Marcus was trying to sever it, to erase Ilara from her own son's life, to break him down and remold him. Julian carefully took the drawings, a silent promise passing between him and the boy. This was the beginning of the evidence. Julian knew he was out of his depth with the legalities. He needed a professional, a ghost who could move through the system without leaving a trace. He called David Chun, a man he'd served with, a brother forged in the crucible of shared danger. David, once a communications specialist in the Army, now ran one of the most exclusive and effective private investigation firms in the country. "Julian." David's voice came over the encrypted line, calm and steady as always. "I had a feeling I'd be hearing from you. What's wrong?" Julian didn't waste time with pleasantries. He laid it all out. The scene in the backyard, the neighbor's fear, the boy's drawings, his gut feeling that this was deeper and darker than simple cruelty. David was silent for a long moment. "The man is a performer, Julian. These types are the most dangerous. They build a fortress of public opinion around themselves. You can't storm the castle. You have to find the secret passage." David's advice was precise. They needed something Marcus couldn't explain away, something that would shatter his carefully constructed image in an instant. "Think like your sister," David urged. Ilara was smart. If she felt threatened, she would have done something. She would have left a trail. The words echoed in Julian's mind. He thought about Ilara, her love of technology, her slight paranoia that she'd inherited from their father. She backed up everything. Photos, documents, emails, all to a private, encrypted cloud server she had set up years ago. Julian still had the emergency access credentials she had given him, a just-in-case measure he had forgotten until this very moment. With David's legal team drafting an emergency petition citing his status as next of kin and presenting the drawings as preliminary evidence of endangerment, they secured a court order for access within 24 hours. That night, in his hotel room, Julian logged into his sister's digital life. Felt like a desecration, an invasion of her privacy. He waded through years of photos, a digital archive of a life cut short. He saw Leo as a baby, Alara beaming, family vacations, birthday parties. He saw the first photos of Marcus, his arm slung casually around Alara's shoulder. At first, they looked happy. But as he scrolled closer to the present, he noticed a change in his sister's eyes, a subtle dimming of her light. Then he found it, tucked away in a folder labeled Household. Not with the photos and videos, were a series of audio files, voice memos from her phone. The first few were innocuous, grocery lists, reminders, but the later ones were different. Her voice was hushed, shaky. She was documenting things. The dates were chilling, starting 3 months before her death. He clicked on the last file, dated 2 days before her accident. The recording started with the sound of a door closing. Then Marcus's voice, tight with fury. "What do you mean he controls the trust? Your brother who hasn't been here in 5 years? That was our money, Alara. For our future. It's not our money, it's Leo's money." Alara's voice was defiant, but laced with fear. "Julian will make sure he's taken care of if anything happens to me." "Oh, something will happen to you if you don't fix this?" Marcus snarled. "You are not cutting me out." The sound of a slap, sharp and brutal, followed by Alara's pained gasp. Then the recording ended. Julian sat in the darkness, his hands clenched into fists, a low growl of pure hatred rising in his throat. This was it. This was the motive. But David had said they needed to shatter his image, and a private recording, while damning, could be contested. Julian kept digging. There was one more folder, labeled with a single character, L. Inside was a collection of video files. They weren't from her phone. The angle was fixed, from a high corner in the living room. Alara had set up a nanny cam. She knew. She was afraid. He clicked the most recent video. The timestamp was from the week before. The video showed Leo sitting on the floor, playing quietly with some blocks. Marcus walked in. "Still playing with baby toys?" he sneered. "And that hair. I swear, I'm gonna chop it all off. Your mother was a weak, sentimental fool, and you're turning out just like her." He then grabbed Leo by the arm, dragged him across the room, and shoved him into the hall closet. "Maybe a little time in the dark will toughen you up." His voice boomed before the heavy click of the lock echoed in the silent room. The camera recorded the closed closet door for 2 hours before the video ended. Julian stared at the screen, his face a granite mask of fury. The secret passage had been found. Now it was time to bring the castle down. Armed with the audio and video evidence, Julian met with David and a woman named Evelyn Reed, a bulldog of a family law attorney with a reputation for taking no prisoners. Evelyn watched the video, her expression growing colder with every passing second. When it was over, she simply closed the laptop and looked at Julian. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice devoid of emotion, "we are going to do more than win custody. We are going to utterly dismantle this man. We will leave nothing but scorched earth." The plan they formulated was audacious and theatrical, designed for maximum impact. David discovered that Marcus, in his campaign to be seen as the perfect guardian, had been nominated for the Community Champion award by a prominent local charity. The award ceremony was in 2 days, at a lavish downtown hotel. It was the perfect stage. Marcus would be at his most confident, surrounded by his admirers, basking in the glow of his own fabricated goodness. Evelyn's team worked around the clock, preparing an emergency custody order, filing a report with Child Protective Services, and preparing a comprehensive package for the district attorney's office. They arranged for plainclothes police officers to be present at the gala. Everything was set. But Marcus was not stupid. He was cunning. The day before the event, a courier delivered a letter to Julian's hotel. It was a temporary restraining order. Marcus had filed a petition with the court, claiming Julian was an unstable and obsessive presence, that his sudden appearance was traumatizing for a grieving Leo, and that he was attempting to interfere with Marcus's rightful guardianship. He had twisted Julian's concern into a weapon, painting him as the villain. Julian saw the strategy immediately. It was a preemptive strike. If Julian showed up at the gala, Marcus could have him arrested, discrediting him before he could say a word. It was a brilliant, vicious move. "He's trying to bait you," David said over the phone. "He wants you to lose your temper to prove his point." "He's going to get his wish," Julian said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I'm going to be there. But I won't be the one losing control." Evelyn Reed simply smiled. "Don't worry, Mr. Vance. A restraining order is a piece of paper. A felony is forever. Let him think he's won." The ballroom of the Grand Excelsior Hotel was a sea of cocktail dresses and tuxedos. The air buzzed with polite chatter and the clinking of champagne glasses. On a large stage at the front of the room, Marcus was bathed in a warm, golden spotlight. He was accepting his Community Champion Award, a handsome, teary-eyed figure of humble strength. A large screen behind him displayed a professionally shot photo of him and a subdued-looking Leo, smiling for the camera. "I don't do it for the accolades," Marcus said, his voice thick with practiced emotion. He clutched the crystal trophy to his chest. "I do it for him, for my son. Every day, I just try to live up to the memory of his incredible mother, Alara, and provide the stable, loving home he deserves." The crowd erupted in applause. At that moment, the grand doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Julian Vance stood there, dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit, his presence sucking the air out of the room. He was calm, deliberate, an avenging angel walking into the lion's den. 2 hotel security guards moved to intercept him. "Sir, this is a private event." Before they could reach him, Evelyn Reed stepped forward, flanked by 2 uniformed police officers. She presented a document to the head of security. "This is a court order," she said crisply. "They are with me." Julian walked down the center aisle, his eyes fixed on Marcus. The applause died. A confused, anxious silence fell over the ballroom. Marcus's face cycled through shock, then fear, and finally settled on a mask of arrogant indignation. "Julian, what is the meaning of this?" he boomed from the stage, playing to the crowd. "I have a restraining order against this man. He is harassing my son and me. Security, remove him at once." Julian stopped at the foot of the stage. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Every eye was on him. "You're right, Marcus," he said, his voice carrying with chilling clarity in the silent room. "You do have a restraining order. But I have a recording." He nodded to David, who was standing discreetly at the audiovisual booth. The smiling picture of Marcus and Leo on the screen behind the stage vanished. It was replaced by a simple audio waveform. Then, Marcus's voice, raw and full of rage, filled the ballroom. "Something will happen to you if you don't fix this." Alara's frightened gasp echoed through the speakers. The crowd recoiled. People whispered, turning to each other in disbelief. Marcus's face went white. "That's fake. It's been doctored," he shrieked, his composure shattering. "Is this doctored too?" Julian asked calmly. The screen flickered again, this time showing the grainy nanny cam footage. The entire ballroom watched in horrified silence as the man they had just honored as a hero verbally abused a small child. They saw him drag Leo across the floor. They heard him call the boy's mother a weak, sentimental fool. They saw him throw the child into a dark closet. They heard the lock click. A woman in the front row sobbed. The silence that followed was heavier, more damning than any accusation. Then, a side door opened, and a social worker entered, holding Leo's hand. The boy had been kept safe, away from the spectacle until this moment. He saw Marcus on the stage, his face contorted with rage, and he saw his uncle standing below, a calm, protective pillar. The social worker knelt and pointed to the frozen image of the closet door on the screen. "Leo, can you tell me what you see?" she asked gently. Leo looked at the screen, then at Marcus. For the first time in months, his voice was clear, ringing through the silent room with the devastating power of truth. "He locked the door," the little boy said, his voice small but steady. "He hurt me. It was dark. That was it." The final, unbreakable seal on Marcus's fate. The crowd's murmuring turned to outright cries of disgust and anger. Marcus, cornered and exposed, completely broke. He let out an animalistic scream of rage and lunged for the AV booth, trying to tear the cables out, to silence the truth. Lies! It's all lies! He bellowed, his face a mask of madness. But the plainclothes officers were already moving. They intercepted him, wrestling him to the ground as he thrashed and cursed. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut was the last note in the symphony of his destruction. His public facade, so carefully built, had been demolished in less than 5 minutes. The aftermath was swift and absolute. Marcus was charged with multiple counts of child abuse, endangerment, fraud, and, following a reopened investigation into Alara's death, felony menacing and suspicious death inquiry. The audio recording of his threat, combined with his financial motive and subsequent pattern of abuse, painted a picture so damning that no jury would ever acquit him. His name became a local synonym for deceit. The charity publicly rescinded his award, and his story was a cautionary tale splashed across the news. He was a monster, finally dragged out from under the bed and into the harsh, unforgiving light. Evelyn Reed, true to her word, handled the custody proceedings with surgical precision. With the mountain of evidence against Marcus, Julian was granted full, permanent guardianship of Leo within a week. He sold his penthouse in the city, the monument to his isolation, and bought a quiet, sprawling house on the coast, a place with huge windows that let in the sea air and the constant, soothing sound of the waves. He liquidated several of his tech holdings, reorienting his life not around boardrooms and stock prices, but around school pickups and bedtime stories. The house Alara had lived in was sold, its contents put in storage, exorcising the ghosts of Marcus's brief, tyrannical reign. The new house was filled with light and warmth, a stark contrast to the cold, sterile perfection Marcus had enforced. Julian let Leo paint on the walls of his room, filling them with colorful, chaotic murals. There were no locked doors in this house. Months passed. The seasons turned. The quiet, withdrawn boy who had first sat in Julian's car began to thaw. He started speaking more, first in short, hesitant sentences, and then in long, rambling stories about his day. He was enrolled in a new school, where a kind art therapist helped him process his trauma not with words, but with clay and paint and color. Julian watched, patient and constant, as the light slowly returned to his nephew's eyes. He was no longer just the protector. He was becoming a parent. He was healing, too. The ghosts of his own past, the failures that had haunted him, grew quieter with every small victory. Every shared laugh, every nightmare comforted, every crayon drawing taped to the refrigerator. One breezy afternoon, Julian was sitting on the wide wooden porch, reading a book, while Leo played in the sand nearby. The boy's chestnut curls, now long and healthy, danced in the salty wind. He looked like his mother. He looked free. Suddenly, Leo stopped digging. He ran up the porch steps, his small hands sandy, his face serious. He didn't say anything. He just wrapped his arms around Julian's neck and squeezed with all his might. It was the first hug he had ever initiated, a simple, profound gesture of complete trust. When he pulled back, he pressed a folded piece of paper into Julian's hand. Julian unfolded it. It was a drawing. 2 stick figures, one very tall and one small, stood on a beach under a bright yellow sun. They were holding hands, and on both their heads, Leo had drawn big, beautiful, wild scribbles of curly hair. A lump formed in Julian's throat. He pulled the boy into his lap, holding him close, and watched the waves roll in, finally at peace. It is a sad truth that the deepest evils are often not committed by snarling monsters in the shadows, but by the smiling, charming figures who win our trust. They build their kingdoms on our assumptions, banking on the idea that no one will ever look behind the pristine facade. We see what we want to see: a grieving partner, a dedicated guardian, a pillar of the community. But how often do we fail to hear the silence of a child who has lost their voice? How often do we mistake fear for shyness and control for discipline? True strength is not found in the loud pronouncements of self-proclaimed heroes, but in the quiet courage of those who are willing to look closer, to listen harder, and to stand up for those who cannot stand for themselves. The truth, once revealed, is a light that no lie can withstand, and a child's whisper can be loud enough to bring down empires of deceit. Have you ever had a gut feeling that something was wrong, even when everyone else insisted everything was fine? We would be honored to hear your stories in the comments below. Your experiences matter, and they can give strength to others who may be facing their own hidden battles. Thank you for listening, and may you always have the courage to trust that quiet voice inside.